Thanks for staying with us. You're watching a special broadcast on India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Singapore visit. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and we continue to have our distinguished guests on the special broadcast, Professor Swaran Singh and also Ambassador Bhattacharya and Akshay, a reporter joining us from Singapore non-stop. Before that, as we move on this special broadcast, let's do a quick recap as far as these four important memoranda of understandings that have been just signed between India and Singapore a short while back. The Ministry of Digital Development and Information of the Republic of Singapore and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of Republic of India have signed MoU on the cooperation in the field of digital technologies. It will facilitate closer cooperation between India and Singapore in the areas of digital technologies such as DPI, cybersecurity, 5G and emerging technologies such as supercomputing, quantum computing and most importantly AI, artificial intelligence. That memoranda number one. MoU number two also enables the cooperation for upskilling and reskilling of workers relating to the digital domain under the ambit of the MoU. This was part of the first MoU, and now the second MoU signed between the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of India and the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore on India-Singapore Semiconductor Ecosystem Partnership. Important because the two nations will cooperate in the semiconductor space or semiconductor cluster developed, cultivation of talent in semiconductor design and manufacturing. In fact, Singaporean companies which are part of the global semiconductor value chains are also very keen to invest in India. Dialogue mechanisms set up under this MoU will facilitate their investments in India. Very, very important. Number three, MoU between the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of the Republic of India and the Ministry of Health of Republic of Singapore. This in cooperation in the field of health and medicine. In fact, here the two nations will cooperate also in the areas of semiconductor cluster development, cultivation of talent in semiconductor design and manufacturing. Singaporean companies which are part of the global semiconductor value chains are keen to invest in India, which we spoke earlier, and in that space the dialogue mechanisms is also being set up to facilitate forward movement here. The fourth MoU signed between the two sides is of the skill development and entrepreneurship of the Republic of India and the Ministry of Education of Republic of Singapore on educational cooperation and skill development. Now this particular understanding aims to promote closer cooperation in the areas of technical and vocational education and training. India and Singapore will have active collaboration in the areas of skill development. MoU will complement the ongoing initiatives. Akshay, would you like to expand on the semiconductor one, because not only confined to the signing or inking of the understanding of MoU, but the mechanism is also being put forth, which also reiterates the higher degree of seriousness and how this is going to, move forward from here. The forward movement enabled by the robust mechanism of the robust mechanism that is being put in place in that space, semiconductor.
Well, absolutely. In fact, Sakal, it's not just the signing up of MoUs, but also a roadmap is being laid out, and that is what the Ministry of External Affairs of India meant when they said that the visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Singapore is going to take the relations between the two countries to a next level. So timeline will be set, a roadmap will be laid out, and it's not just talks or signing up of MoUs, it's also work on the ground that will begin soon after the MoUs are signed. So it is an understanding that is being made between the industry partners, the mechanism that we are talking about is also going to facilitate the investments moving into India. So while Singapore has remained the highest contributor of FDI to India in the last year, it continues, it expects to remain at that spot by inducting more and more semiconductor industry partners to invest in a ripe market like India, that is the place of the largest population on earth. Everything that we are using nowadays in India is digital. A lot more phones are being manufactured. Automobiles are in demand. So technology is in demand as the economy of India grows, and behind this technology remains semiconductor. So Singapore realizes that Singapore has been a part of the value chain of the semiconductor industry across the world, and it wants to tap onto a market like India, and that is why Singapore also is very
Let's go live to Singapore again. Opening remarks from both sides. This is after the exchange of MoUs.
करने के बाद ये हमारी पहली मुलाकात है। मेरी तरफ से आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई और हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं। मुझे विश्वास है 4G के नेतृत्व में सिंगापुर और अधिक तेजी से प्रगति करेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, सिंगापुर केवल एक पार्टनर देश नहीं है। सिंगापुर हर विकासशील देश के लिए एक प्रेरणा है। हम भी भारत में अनेकों सिंगापुर बनाना चाहते हैं और मुझे खुशी है कि हम इस दिशा में मिलकर प्रयास कर रहे हैं। हमारे बीच जो मिनिस्टरियल राउंड टेबल बनी है वो एक पाथ ब्रेकिंग मैकेनिज्म है। स्किलिंग, डिजिटलाइजेशन, मोबिलिटी, एडवांस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग जैसे सेमीकंडक्टर और एआई, हेल्थ केयर, सस्टेनेबिलिटी और साइबर सिक्योरिटी जैसे क्षेत्रों में सहयोग की दिशा में ये इनिशिएटिव की पहचान बन गई है।
Okay, let's quickly do a recap as far as Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's opening remarks are concerned. He began by congratulating the newly appointed Prime Minister of Singapore, and he said that there is no doubt that Singapore in the coming days will develop and prosper further. He said that the relationship or the partnership between India and Singapore as far as two nations are concerned is not only a partnership but an inspiration in many ways. In fact, Prime Minister added that he wants to make many Singapores in India in the context of development, that was. And he also spoke about how already the existing mechanisms and roundtable meetings between the two sides have played an important role, and they are path-breaking mechanisms to take the relationship forward and bolster the relationship. Prime Minister also, if we could go back to our guests, also talked about the areas like skilling, digitalization, semiconductor, specific mention there of the cyber security. These are the areas where India and Singapore aims to move forward. Professor Swarn Singh, okay, we have the guests. Professor Swarn Singh, Ambassador Bhattacharya, and DD India's Akshay. Before I come to the guests, because Akshay is there in Singapore where the action is, Akshay, what do you make of the opening remarks? You know, that point where India aims to make more and many Singapores in India, quote unquote, developed model, the development model of Singapore, forward-looking, futuristic.
Well, absolutely, and this is not the first time that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has cited Singapore as an example of a smart city. In fact,
yes.
Here, from garbage disposal to public transportation to schooling to healthcare, everything has been seamlessly designed. And while we understand that the area of Singapore is less than that of Delhi, so micromanagement has been possible, but the kind of will that the Indian leadership has been showing as far as the smart city projects are concerned, each and every Indian is expecting and hoping that these kind of promises that have been made will turn into reality one day, and work has already started as far as turning India into a country with several such Singapores in terms of development. So it's not just the skyscrapers or large buildings or large roads, but the seamless integration of the entire city as one unit that counts here in Singapore. Children can safely take public transportation that run on time. So that has been one of the most important aspect of the public transportation, that the timing has been perfect. There are a mechanism in place that whenever there is a crisis that comes up, be it natural or man-made, there is always some mechanism in place to fix that problem that erupts in the city. So all of these things that have been done have taken a lot of time, a lot of decades to make Singapore what it is today, and has been the dream of Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he had promised several smart cities across the country, and the work had started some time back and is continuing. And with Prime Minister's every visit to Singapore, Prime Minister talks about learning a lot from Singapore in terms of the development that the country has achieved. That is quite interesting to see how it turns up in India. Back to you, Sakal.
Okay, Akshay, stay with us. Professor Bhattacharya and Professor Singh, Ambassador Bhattacharya, how do you see these brief remarks in the context of India or Indian Prime Minister setting the agenda, the futuristic agenda of India-Singapore ties?
Well, the opening remarks that are made at these meetings are usually like a chapeau of what you wish to do and the kind of issues that you will actually discuss and you want to share in public as well. And I think in addition to that, the thing that Prime Minister really emphasized, and I think this is important because Lawrence Wong has assumed his office only recently, was to exhibit that warmth to Lawrence Wong in person. Because there is an institutional warmth that is there between India and Singapore and the Prime Ministers of India and Singapore. But I think the warmth that is now coming up in the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Wong is significant. Remember, yesterday they had a private meeting, and the meeting was held at Sri Temasek, which is the residence of the first Prime Minister.
Adding the personal touch to the whole visit, basically. The bonhomie and the camaraderie between the two leadership is visible, and the way the would you say, Professor Singh, just sir, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, a quick point on that, the Singaporean side needing India as much as we need them, but India being part of their growth story construct, the way they have, basically the whole welcome aspect by the Singaporean new leadership.
Indeed, Sakal, good you brought out the need of Singapore, which is equally significant. The Prime Minister, of course, complimented saying Singapore is a country that is an inspiration for other countries. But if that developed country has to develop and continue to grow forward, it would need both more physical space and more hands at work. And that is where he underlined the complementarity, where India can be a kind of a partner which will not just ensure India's growth story, but also continued growth story of Singapore. And if you look at all 4 MoUs, whether it is on semiconductors or on telecommunications, on healthcare, on education, central thread in all MoUs is upskilling, skill development. And that means you are training a next generation which will deliver in next 20 years at least. So it's already focused on future and starting, a new level of relationship, in which case Singapore is going to be as much a beneficiary as India is going to be beneficiary. And I think in that sense, it's a complementary relationship to move forward into future, but also underlining the personal bonhomie, the personal relationship of two leaders. And of course, the whole set of other leaders that are sitting in these conversations is to underline how that is going to be mutually beneficiary relationship, where both partners will be, taking advantage of that partnership and moving forward, and where India wants to really move and become a developed country by 2047, would need all those things of advanced manufacturing, of upskilling, of all kinds of digitalization. That are already in Singapore. And if you imagine of building multiple Singapores in India, that not just take India's story forward, but also ensure that Singapore's story continues to move forward as well.
Yes, Singapore's story continues to move forward as well, and there is a little India in Singapore as well, as Akshay, when you've reported on that as well. The Singapore story and the India story, and also I would want your quick take on when Prime Minister calls the ministerial and the roundtable mechanism path breaking. I think there's a message there.
Well, absolutely, there is a message there, and what Prime Minister means as far as this mechanism is concerned is clearly that all the arrangements and all the plans have already been made as far as the work that lies ahead. Between as far as the development, the cooperation between the two countries are concerned. So this mechanism is going to hold these MoUs together, these plans together, and to ensure that there are checks and balances as far as the work is concerned. So clearly, be it connectivity, we are talking about healthcare, we are talking about upskilling people, the human resources, also education and vocational trainings as well that are also part of the MoUs. So all of these are large aspects for a country as diverse and as large as India. You have to have mechanisms in place to ensure that the MoUs that have been signed here or the plans that have been made by the top leadership are actually implemented on the ground. Because Singapore as a country is particular about the kind of work that they have been doing, especially when it comes to their own national security or development. So everything has a mechanics, everything has a mechanism here to ensure that things run seamlessly, and that is something what a Prime Minister is also hinting at, that when there is an MoU or an agreement between the two countries or a plan that is made between the business leadership, it's not just thin words, words in thin air. There will be a robust mechanism on the ground to ensure that they are implemented on the ground and turned into reality as well. So clearly there is a very serious approach that is being taken by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his government as far as the implementation of these plans to turn India also a hub for several such Singapores and to be part of the growth story that has been taking place for the past several years.
An absolutely mutually beneficial relationship. Ambassador Bhattacharya, Professor Singh and Akshay, please stay with us. Let's once again go back and play out this Prime Minister Narendra Modi's opening remarks or opening statements after the exchange of 4 important MOUs between India and Singapore. Listen.
एक्सेलेंसी, गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत के लिए मैं आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद करता हूं। आपके प्रधानमंत्री पद ग्रहण करने के बाद ये हमारी पहली मुलाकात है। मेरी तरफ से आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई और हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं। मुझे विश्वास है 4G के नेतृत्व में सिंगापुर और अधिक तेजी से प्रगति करेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, सिंगापुर केवल एक पार्टनर देश नहीं है। सिंगापुर हर विकासशील देश के लिए एक प्रेरणा है। हम भी भारत में अनेकों सिंगापुर बनाना चाहते हैं और मुझे खुशी है कि हम इस दिशा में मिलकर प्रयास कर रहे हैं। हमारे बीच जो मिनिस्टरियल राउंड टेबल बनी है वो एक पाथ ब्रेकिंग मैकेनिज्म है। स्किलिंग
Okay, again, just to quickly recapitulate, and as we stay with our panelists and Akshay, Prime Minister Modi, Honorable Prime Minister Modi starts by congratulating, first of all, thanking the Singaporean side for a very warm welcome. Well, that's something Ambassador Bhattacharya and Professor Singh and Akshay we've been talking about. The warmth exhibited by the, the Singaporean side there, the leadership there. Prime Minister congratulates the Singaporean Prime Minister for assuming office, and Prime Minister starts by talking about how Singapore as a nation has prospered, and for any developed country, Singapore sets an inspiration, an example and an inspiration. He talks about how India, Ambassador Bhattacharya, your take on this, India wants to have or make many Singapores there. That was in the context of, like Akshay rightly pointed out, as an example of the smart city. And we would like to have many small Singapores in India. I mean, considering their size and our size, but then the way the whole MOUs and this particular visit has taken it to the next level. Ambassador Bhattacharya.
What Prime Minister was alluding to was not only to compliment and applaud the Singaporeans for the remarkable success that they've achieved in the economic sphere, but also in terms of organization of urban life and the quality of life for Singaporeans, and how India would wish to do that. So as we move towards this aspiration of a Viksit Bharat, these are kind of benchmarks that we would wish to do. It also is an indication that although Singapore is a small economy, and therefore not all of Singapore can be perhaps replicated in all of India, but there can be, as Prime Minister highlighted, small pockets of excellence that can come up. Sometimes we try and develop special economic zones which are focused at certain areas, but a more composite, complex structure, perhaps like a smart city or something. Our smart city project has had collaborations with foreign partners, including with Singapore, and some of these urban planning aspects have come in. I wanted to actually also mention thing that came out in this during this visit and this conversation. If you notice the exchange ceremony of the MoUs, and reflects the very high level of understanding and confidence that there is in the partnership, because not only was it elegant the way our relationship is, but it was also very efficient and businesslike, the way the Singaporeans like things to be. You can understand that Prime Minister is going to have 4 important political meetings this morning with Singapore leaders. So in order to have an efficient MOU exchange, you don't need to go through the mechanics of actually signing them. They can be done in advance. And that's the way the Singaporeans, which is very purposeful and oriented towards achieving objectives. The ministerial framework that Prime Minister referred to is really another example of that business-like approach. Because when you are trying to develop and further the relation, the importance of it that you must have deliverables. In other words, implementation of the decisions that you have taken must be there on the ground to see. And many years ago, when we had started the Act East policy, and Singapore was one of the key planks through which we were expanding our Act East, we realized that there were implementation issues on the ground when Singaporeans were bringing in investments, for instance. And we formed a ministerial group of officials at that time. And then it was not enough just to have interministerial, because very often the problems would lie in the states. And so we would bring in the state officials so that everyone would be on the same round table discussing the issues, not confronting or facing each other, but on a round table on equal footing, because we are working towards common benefit. And I'm so happy that today that kind of holistic approach towards implementation, not just in generating new ideas, but also to ensure implementation, is now happening at the ministerial level, and Prime Minister
and Prime Minister complementing and referring to that ministerial engagement and roundtable as path breaking, Professor Singh.
Indeed, I think we have to really notice this, that as India grows as a major power, it has to begin to redefine its foreign policy lexicon, its mechanisms, its style of functioning. So just like India has started something called 2+2 meetings with major powers like Australia, Japan, and United States, India had started, for example, informal summits with China. This ministerial roundtable is a very interesting institutionalization where you can get 4 most senior ministers sitting together in Singapore, and vice versa, I'm sure there will be visits from Singapore to India, which takes care of a lot of interministerial issues, because all 4 top ministers are sitting and having this round table. And if Prime Minister was alluding to this being institutionalized with Singapore, and I think that will be a very significant step forward in creating a new mechanism where, India-Singapore relationships may annually start having these ministerial roundtables, which will, clear out several cobwebs that could potentially happen after MOUs are signed, and how to implement, how to take them to the ground. That is, I think, going to be a very significant step forward in a whole new kind of mechanism being built in a bilateral relationship. And I understand that the mention of roundtable was that it is being institutionalized in that sense. That will be really also, showcasing how 2 countries are beginning to show that commitment of having annual 4 senior most ministers meeting regularly with each other to make sure relationship is directed towards future, but also things that are already agreed upon are implemented successfully on the ground. And that would introduce, I don't know if any other country has so far introduced that kind of ministerial roundtable in a bilateral relationship.
Yes.
That will be an innovation in foreign policy in that sense.
Yes, maybe Akshay can come in there. You know, this visit was preceded by the second ministerial roundtable where 4 of our very senior ministers went there, traveled to Singapore to meet their counterparts, setting the tone and the agenda for this particular important visit. Akshay, a quick one from you on that and how these areas are, you know, the new frontiers are indicative of this relationship getting more robust in times to come, consolidating it further. Akshay.
Well, Sakal, I would like to connect this question to the last one where you were talking about the mechanism that the Prime Minister is talking about. So there you have the exact answer. You know, the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable is a kind of mechanism that India has built with Singapore that it has with no other country. In fact, 4 senior ministers from Foreign Minister to Commerce Minister to Finance Minister, is going to, they all are going to regularly interact with their counterparts here in Singapore. In fact, Singapore has appointed 6 ministers, has given charge to 6 ministers to regularly interact with the Indian ministers that have been selected by the Government of India to ensure that there are regular discussions, there are regular, exchange of ideas as far as these ideas are concerned. So as far as the signing up of MoUs is there, this kind of mechanism that has been put in place, the ISMR, they are going to help, realizing these dreams that the leadership has as far as the work on the ground is concerned. So be it the connectivity projects, the digitization, semiconductor projects that PM expects to come to India and boom in India. The healthcare sector, the education sector, or the smart city projects that we are referring them to, they are huge projects when implemented in a country of over 1.4 billion population. Singapore can be micromanaged, but when we talk about India, a population of over 1.4 billion people, it is quite difficult, and without a mechanism, it may just fall apart if not regularly followed up. So that is the mechanism that Prime Minister was talking about.
Okay.
It is one of a kind of mechanism that India has in fact implemented with the country. So these ISMR roundtable meetings that are regularly going to take place are going to ensure that these are not just MoUs but also work on the ground.
Yes, and precisely why Prime Minister referred to them as path-breaking. I think, Akshay, you have to move forward there. Thank you very much for joining us on this leg of the broadcast. Thank you, Akshay, joining us from Singapore. Of course, get back to you later on our show. And let's stay with our guests and talk also about the second day of his visit. Prime Minister Modi will be meeting the Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Emeritus Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong. Prime Minister will also be in fact calling the Singaporean President, and this is Prime Minister Modi's 5th visit to Singapore. As we've already told you, he last visited the Southeast Asian country in 2018. Ambassador Bhattacharya, the future and a bit on the engagements at the political level. What does this signify?
A lot of the relationship that we have with Singapore has been kind of visionary in nature. And this is usually the result of very intense political understanding at the highest levels. And I think we've been very fortunate to have this engagement at that level for a very long period of time. And Singapore has thus emerged as a very key partner in different areas. And this is very interesting because, normally we tend to think of relationships in silos, but with Singapore, we've been able to have a more holistic approach. We've been able to break the silos. Even when we look at relations with some of our other key partners and we have joint sessions, we look at, say, the strategic partner, and we have the foreign minister and the defense minister joining in that exchange. But with Singapore, we've been able to have this across the economic as well as the strategic fronts. And that is actually what brings the solidity to the partnership, because economics cannot survive by itself, neither can strategy. And both have to complement each other. And Singapore and India have realized that working together, we can do this. The relationship that, former prime ministers had with previous Singaporean leaders and prime ministers was also equally significant. And that is the foundation on which. So I'm very, very happy. And this is seen like a natural thing that Prime Minister will meet with Lee Hsien Loong, who for over 10 years had been Singapore's Prime Minister, and also meet with Goh Chok Tong, who was the Prime Minister before him, and Tharman Shanmugaratnam, the President, who has been a great friend of India for a long period of time, will also be, he will be calling upon him. If you notice, the Singaporeans also have this diversity aspect that they try and bring into the relationship.
Okay.
We had this experience with the Singaporean presidents over a period of time, and the kind of relations that we maintain with them has been very important. So this marks the maturity of the relationship and the contribution of the political vision that relationship forward.
Professor Singh?
Clearly, I fully agree the way Ambassador Bhattacharya just explained it. It marks the maturity of mutual relationship. But let me also add the fact that Singapore's political elite is known for a very business-like behavior in their interactions, is clearly being matched by Indian side. The Indian Prime Minister also likes to have a very hyperactive, very, very hectic schedules when he's traveling abroad. So you can imagine in one day he's going to have several successive meetings, equally intense meetings. It's being also underlined he in the same day is meeting 3 generations of Singapore's political elite in that sense. Visit to Parliament, MoUs being signed, and now the meetings with the former Prime Ministers and President is also, I think, being matched by Indian Prime Minister also in his foreign visits and interactions, being very businesslike in ensuring that things are moving forward at a very hectic pace. And Singapore, in that sense, is a good match. Then we'll see so many meetings and so many results happening in the same day. And I think these are also possible because, as we keep saying, it's a very, very robust relationship. It's very deep-rooted relationship. It's a very strong relationship in a whole lot of sectors. But one can notice that this visit's focus has usually been on building sort of relationship moving towards future, upskilling, skill building, technology, digitalization, and semiconductors, and so on. And this interministerial roundtable, I think, is a very interesting new mechanism that we have introduced. And hopefully this is also going to be flexible in future in terms of which ministers and how many ministers will be joining in these roundtables. And I think that will be a kind of a one of its kind of a roundtable that I am aware of between any 2 countries, which showcases that they both are equally excited in working together and they want to take the relationship forward. And I want to underline the fact that Prime Minister said he wants to create multiple Singapores in India. That reminds me of the 60s and 70s, where during Mrs. Indira Gandhi's time, India was creating islands of excellence. This was a very important expression at that time as India was moving towards nuclear power, oceanography, outer space, and so on.
Okay.
I think similarly, a new push and acceleration is being thought of now in Prime Minister's vision in creating multiple Singapores in India. And that will be a much more solid way of taking India forward to 2047 and making India a developed nation, just like Singapore is today.
Absolutely, undoubtedly. Professor Singh and Ambassador Bhattacharya, please stay with us. Let's also talk about what is expected, what else is expected today. We will go to the guest in a bit, but Prime Minister Modi will be meeting with Singaporean business leaders and interact with the leaders of the country's semiconductor ecosystem. Prime Minister Modi, along with his Singapore counterpart, will also be visiting a semiconductor manufacturing facility. Reportedly, Prime Minister's visit will build synergies in semiconductor ecosystems of Singapore and India. Remember, MoU has been already exchanged in that space between the 2 sides. India and Singapore already share a strategic alliance in the region, and Prime Minister Modi's visit aims to deepen these strategic partnership or these strategic ties. Singapore is India's largest trade partner within the association of ASEAN. in the ASEAN construct or the ASEAN scheme of things, and also the sixth largest trade partner worldwide. It is also the leading source of FDI in the last financial year, with a whopping investment of 11.77 billion that was reported in 2023 alone. Singapore has been a long-term investor in India as well. But talking about investments, Ambassador Bhattacharya, now shifting focus to the business component. Can we go to Ambassador Bhattacharya and Professor Singh? The business component assumes also a greater significance considering the trade volume, the investment volume, the FDI volume between the two sides. And today, as we speak, I think the next important meeting that is lined up later in the day is the meeting with the business leadership in Singapore.
So the economic content of the relation has always been extremely important for both sides. For Singapore, it means that they have a very large market where they can use their capital and technology and realize high returns on their investment. For India, it means that you have access to high technologies as well as investments that come in from Singapore. And I think we try and bring about the complementarities of this. There's another feature of this relationship because, as you know, in Singapore, a lot of the business is not just simply private, but in a sense, it is government directed. And a lot of their fund houses are actually owned by their government funds. Sovereign funds are owned and governed by the Singapore government. And therefore, this G2G interaction becomes extremely important. I think one of the key things that Prime Minister will try to do to the Singapore people, the business community, when he meets them, is to tell them in his own words as to what is this vision of India going to be as we move ahead into the next few decades that they can invest in, have great confidence in, that they will provide transparency, and they'll have an implementing mechanism that will iron out all the problems that they have. And I think Singaporeans love that kind of business-like approach. As you know, Temasek, one of Singapore's leading fund houses, is one of the largest investors in India, not only in terms of the institutional or financial flows that come in, but also in terms of venture capital, angel funding, and sponsoring and startups. And I think that will be one of the areas and one of the institutions that Prime Minister will focus on so that they can have a much larger share and contribution. Also, as you know, Singapore is often the regional hub, sometimes the Asian hub for many of the global financial houses. And so we will also reach out to them so that they continue their advancement in the Indian markets, not only in the stock houses that are doing extremely well and we need to support, but also as their consequent impact on the manufacturing sector, which, as you know, is a new priority for India. So I think the next 2 hours when Prime Minister spends with the business community will be very critical for the next 2 decades for India.
The future roadmap?
By underlining that usually it used to be Mauritius, which was largest source of India's FDI. I understand last year Singapore was the largest source of FDI to India. Indeed, in last quarter of a century, about last 24, 25 years, Singapore has invested over $160 billion in India. And also we are talking of bilateral trade. Out of the 122 billion trade with ASEAN, 35 billion trade is only with Singapore, which is a small city-state. So what we are underlining here is a very strong relationship, which is now thinking of moving forward. How is that happening now? Other than trade in terms of transactions, moving forward to then investments, now I think both sides are beginning to focus on joint innovation and development. And I think in that sense, partnerships, whether it is in defense or in health sector or in telecommunications, or also now increasingly exciting area of semiconductors, joint research and development, I think is an area which is going to make them more or less equal partners in that sense of how together they want to take their future forward. and how both can be complementary in taking that future forward in building a stronger economic and technological relationship between India and Singapore. And I think that is why this is being described, taking the relationship to the next level, from trade transactions to investments to now focus on joint development and innovation in multiple sectors. And I think that makes the relationship moving into the next step and next level, and I think future oriented in that sense.
Okay. Okay, Professor Singh and Ambassador Bhattacharya, please stay with us. Let's do a quick recap as far as day 1 and day 2 of Prime Minister Singapore visit is concerned. Remember, today being the day 2, and in fact, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi he received a rousing welcome from the Indian diaspora yesterday as he arrived in Singapore for a 2-day visit on Wednesday. DD India's Akshay Dogre spoke to these dancers and these performers who you see on your screens on the opportunity that they had to perform before the Prime Minister. They had an audience in the form of Prime Minister there as the Indian diaspora warmly welcomed Prime Minister Modi. They were clearly elated and very happy interacting with him. Some of the special moments of yesterday when Prime Minister arrived at Hotel Shangri-La, and rousing welcome by the Indian diaspora put in place for Prime Minister Modi.
There were a lot of cultural performances that were put on display. How you guys performed as far as the upon the arrival of Prime Minister. How was the experience?
It's very exciting, very a unique experience for sure. We are very honored to represent Indian dance in Singapore. Right. We are dancing Odissi. Ma'am,
you were here part of the reception. How was it, the experience?
Well, the experience was out of this world. It was definitely a one-time opportunity for all of us to have been performed in front of Narendra Modi ji. And what more, a cherry on the cake is that he himself came forward and asked for this, what is called as Tipru, and asked for it. He first did wish us Happy Ganesh Chaturthi, that is going to come in 2 days. Right. So we are super more excited for it. And again, I mean, words are not enough to express how happy we are.
These people are a part of the Indian diaspora. Many of them have also performed in Indian, different kind of Indian arts. So how was it, ma'am? How was the experience seeing the Prime Minister?
Wonderful, wonderful. It was a lifetime, like you can say, it is a lifetime achievement I got. Seeing Modi ji live, for me it was the first time.
What about you?
Ishan.
Ishan, so how was the experience like seeing Prime Minister so up close?
It was actually really like inspiring because you could see he has such a big aura.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was very excited.
Sir, what about you?
Yeah, I'm born in India. Now Singapore is home. So Modi ji is a living legend. He's an inspiration for all. And we came with all the family just to get a glimpse of him, to get his presence.
Right. So this is Prime Minister's 5th visit to Singapore. Right. Do you think that the push that he has given in his foreign policy has brought the two countries closer?
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of scope. There's a lot of scope because we have a very enthusiastic and very motivated Indian diaspora here, and there's a lot of scope.
There is a lot of enthusiasm that you can sense in the air here. So Prime Minister has arrived, and there is a lot on cards to bring the two countries closer even more. With camera person Vinay Kumar Tiwari, Akshay Dogre, DD India.
Okay, talking about day 2, we can run those visuals. Also, early in the morning, Prime Minister was accorded a ceremonial reception at the Parliament of Singapore in the presence of Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, which was followed by signing off on the visitors book. That was later followed by the introduction of the delegates from both sides, and next in line was the delegation level talks, and then of course signing of MoUs and exchange of MoUs under the presence of Prime Minister Modi as well as Singaporean Prime Minister Wong Lee. These are the visuals of earlier today morning on day 2. Prime Minister Modi being accorded a ceremonial reception at the Parliament of Singapore. And before we wrap up this special broadcast, let's go back to our distinguished guests and have some final comments. Ambassador Bhattacharya, now in the context of the MoUs and especially the traditional relationship, the robust relationship that the two sides have had, but what makes or the kind of substantive difference that this visit is going to make as far as India-Singapore ties are concerned?
I think what we see in terms of the outcomes that have come up at this particular visit, and I'm sure that there's a lot of preparatory work for outcomes in the future as well. But in this particular visit, what I do notice are two distinct trends. The first is that India's national development priorities are being aligned with the leading powers across the world. And Singapore has emerged as one of them when we look at the field of the digital space and of the upskilling for new industry. And this is extremely important because what it means is that Singapore and India will continue to be partners in this ahead of the curve kind of technologies, in this ahead of the curve kind of relationship that we have tried to develop. The second area, which I think is extremely important and perhaps...
Okay, let's try and...
is in terms of the kind of engagement that we will have as we move from geoeconomics to the geostrategic space. And the presence of, the Prime Minister was accompanied by the External Affairs Minister and the National Security Advisor over there. The kind of relations that we will have in terms of maritime security, geostrategic affairs, regional security issues, whether it is Myanmar or South China Sea. And I think that the kind of exchanges that he will have with the political leadership will again re-entrench our partnership with one of the leading partners in the ASEAN bloc as one of the leading planks for our Look East policy and what agent in the Indo-Pacific agenda. So I think on national priority as well as India going ahead as a global player, this is going to be a very significant visit.
Okay. Professor Singh, your take?
Let me say a few things as takeaways from Prime Minister's visit to Singapore. First, it of course reiterates how Singapore remains the springboard of India's look east to act far east to Indo-Pacific vision and strategy and policy and so on. Second, I think it's also underlining the fact that India increasingly with the developed countries is underlining and building both the connect and complementarity of partnership as India wants to go and become a developed country by 2047. Third, I think it's also significant because it's building a personal relationship of Prime Minister Narendra Modi with the new Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong. And that personal equation, personal warmth is something which is very central to how foreign policy is conducted by Prime Minister Modi. We have noticed this in over last decade and so on. Final, I think it's also equally significant that under Prime Minister Modi, we have really privileged and prioritized engaging Indian diaspora and building India's cultural connect. And in that sense, creating not just energy, but synergy in building constituencies, pro-India constituencies, India-friendly constituencies in these foreign countries, which are going to be far more helpful in not just creating visions which are shared, but also ensuring that those visions are actually implemented on the ground. And we just noticed the enthusiasm of Indian diaspora in Singapore, just like we have seen similar pictures and videos and conversations in several other countries where Prime Minister has visited. So I think it's an overall spectrum of takeaways that one can underline coming from this visit to Singapore and Brunei before that. And I think that is really showcasing India, incrementally moving forward towards its centennial goal of becoming a developed country and also becoming a very significant international player in organizing global governance and so on, and seeking reformation of global governance structures.
Okay.
So these are all brick building over a period of time in which Singapore is a very significant partnership.
So basically, all in all, a mutually beneficial relationship between India and Singapore, where India is definitely going to be part of their growth story and vice versa. Gentlemen, that's all we have time for. Many thanks. It was such a pleasure interacting with both of you. Ambassador Bhattacharya, thank you very much, sir. And as always, Professor Singh, always a pleasure talking to you on this broadcast. Thank you. And before we wrap up this special broadcast, Prime Minister Modi in Singapore, let's also do a quick recap of these beautiful visuals. Yesterday, day one, when Prime Minister Modi was received and accorded a very rousing welcome, warm welcome from the Indian diaspora. Upon his arrival in Singapore on Wednesday, he tried his hands at the dhol, making that moment all the more special at a cultural event, a small cultural event organized by the Indian diaspora to welcome their Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Singapore. Take a look. All right. Well, we need to just take a short break here. We'll wrap up this particular edition of DD India special broadcast. We will be keeping an eye on all the developments and Prime Minister's engagements on day two. But you can also share with us the thoughts of the news of the day. For those on the go, you can all get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. This is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Please scan the QR code that's going to be right on your screens. We'll be back in a while. Please stay with us. Namaskar.